Move it, Gunny. Some of us have a war to simulate. The voice, a blade of polished brass and entitlement, cut through the low hum of the servers in the observation deck of the Joint Task Force Advanced Simulation Center, a place colloquially known as the Crucible. The words belong to Brigadier General Marcus Thorne, a man whose meteoric rise was rumored to have more to do with his connections in the Pentagon than any time spent in the sand and grit of a forward operating base. The crowd of younger officers and visiting dignitaries, a nervous constellation of crisp uniforms and ambitious smiles, offered a ripple of sycophantic laughter. It was the kind of laugh that sought favor, the kind that validated a superior's casual cruelty at the expense of a subordinate. The target of his remark and the sharp, unceremonious elbow that accompanied it was Gunnery Sergeant Eva Rostova. She stumbled, not from the force of the blow, which was more dismissive than violent, but from a sheer unexpectedness of the contact. She caught her balance with a small, economical shift of her weight, a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible, planting her worn combat boot on the polished concrete floor with a finality that belied her slight frame. She offered no retort. Her face, a study in placid neutrality, did not register anger, surprise, or humiliation. Her gray eyes, clear and focused, simply blinked once, then returned to the diagnostics panel of the primary holographic display she had been calibrating. Her hands, steady and sure, resumed their work, fingers dancing across a touchscreen interface with a practiced rhythm. She was an island of silent competence in an ocean of nervous energy. But from the back of the darkened room, standing in the deep shadows near the server racks, the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, Leland Stonewall Jackson, saw it. He saw the way she had recovered her balance. It wasn't a stumble and catch. It was a textbook transition to a stable combat footing, a deep-seated reflex that spoke of countless hours in environments where an unstable posture could mean the difference between life and death. He saw the worn, faded fabric of her Marpat utility uniform, sun-bleached in ways that didn't come from a quartermaster's warehouse. He saw the faint, silvery trace of a scar that ran from her right temple into her tightly pulled blonde bun, a detail lost to everyone else in the dim light. And as he watched her turn back to her work, ignoring a one-star general as if he were nothing more than a passing breeze, Sergeant Major Jackson felt a familiar, cold certainty crystallize in his gut. The general had just made a mistake of monumental proportions. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce its presence, type quiet professional in the comments below. The air in the Crucible was thick with the smell of ozone and cooled air, a sterile scent that couldn't quite mask the underlying tension of the impending simulation. This was no ordinary training exercise. It was a full-scale demonstration for a Congressional Oversight Committee, a billion-dollar dog and pony show designed to justify the budget for the military's next generation of urban warfare technology. General Thorne was the master of ceremonies, and he played the part with theatrical gusto. He paced before the massive, floor-to-ceiling holographic display, a swagger stick tucked under his arm, his voice booming with self-assurance as he described the capabilities of the assets under his command. "What you are about to witness, ladies and gentlemen," he declared, gesturing to the shimmering, three-dimensional map of a fictional city block, "is the future of asymmetric warfare. We have total information dominance. Our new fleet of Whisper-class drones provides persistent, multi-spectrum overwatch. We can see a target's heat signature through 3 feet of concrete. We can read a license plate from 40,000 feet. The enemy has nowhere to hide. The fog of war is a thing of the past." He paused for effect, letting his words hang in the air. He glanced over his shoulder at Gunnery Sergeant Rostova, who was still quietly working on her console. A smirk touched his lips. "Our success is guaranteed by technology, precision, and the unparalleled skill of our operators on the ground. Not by technicians. However diligent, the jab was clear, another casual dismissal meant to reinforce his own importance. Rostova gave no indication she had heard him. Her focus was absolute. She was tracing power fluctuations, her eyes scanning lines of code that scrolled rapidly down a secondary monitor. Her movements were a model of efficiency, each touch and keystroke deliberate, stripped of any wasted energy. To the untrained eye, she looked like a simple IT support staffer, a cog in the vast machine. But to Sergeant Major Jackson, her posture told a different story. She wasn't just standing, she was rooted. She wasn't just typing, she was interrogating a complex system with a fluency that went beyond any training manual. He noted the non-regulation watch on her wrist, a rugged, analog timepiece with a custom paracord band, its face scratched and pitted. He saw the small, custom-made multi-tool she slipped from a pouch on her belt, its metal worn smooth with years of use. These were the tells of a seasoned operator, the subtle modifications an individual makes to their kit when their life depends on its reliability. Thorne, meanwhile, was a peacock in full display, his uniform immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror shine, his hands soft and uncalloused. He spoke of war as a theoretical concept, a complex problem to be solved with algorithms and superior firepower. Rostova, in her profound and unnerving silence, seemed to be a part of the war itself, an artifact of its harsh realities, present in this clean, sterile room like a ghost at a banquet. The simulation began. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the live feeds from a dozen different assets. Drone perspectives swooped over rooftops, helmet cams gave a jittery, first-person view from the assault team on the ground, and tactical overlays highlighted suspected enemy positions in glowing red icons. General Thorne narrated the proceedings like a sports commentator, pointing out the technological marvels at play. Notice the facial recognition software cross-referencing the targets with our intelligence database in real time, he boasted. The assault team knows who they're up against before they even breach the door. The room was filled with murmurs of approval. The colonels and congressmen nodded, impressed by the seamless flow of information. The assault team, a squad of elite Marines, moved with fluid precision through the simulated streets, their progress tracked perfectly on the main screen. It was a flawless demonstration of modern warfare, clean and decisive. And then chaos erupted. The main holographic display dissolved into a blizzard of digital static. One by one, the drone feeds winked out, replaced by black squares with the ominous red text. Signal lost, the helmet cams froze, then went dark. The entire intricate web of technology that General Thorne had been so proud of simply vanished. A collective gasp went through the room. The low hum of the servers was suddenly drowned out by a rising tide of panicked whispers. "What's happening?" a congressman demanded. "We have a systems failure," a technician shouted from across the room. General Thorne's face went from ruddy confidence to pale fury in an instant. "Get it back online. Get it back online now," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a red cell inject." A voice cut through the noise, calm and steady. It was Rostova. All eyes turned to her. She hadn't moved from her console, but her posture had changed. She was leaning forward slightly, her entire being focused on the lines of code, still scrolling on her small monitor. "It's not a failure. It's a deliberate, high-level cyber attack. They're not just jamming us. They've inserted a cascading logic bomb into the primary network core. They've taken everything." Her diagnosis was delivered without a trace of panic, a simple statement of fact. While the other technicians scrambled, shouting jargon and frantically trying to reboot firewalls, Rostova moved with a quiet, terrifying purpose. Her fingers became a blur on her keyboard, not trying to restore the system, but to salvage something from its smoldering ruins. While General Thorne bellowed orders and his hand-picked team of network specialists descended into finger-pointing and frantic, fruitless reboots, Rostova disengaged from the main network entirely. She turned her back on the dead holographic display and moved to the far wall, to a section of panels that looked like a relic from a bygone era. It was a manual override in patch bay, covered in a thin layer of dust, its face a chaotic maze of coaxial ports, toggle switches, and heavy-duty circuit breakers. It was an analog monstrosity in a digital world, an appendix of the facility's infrastructure that most of the younger technicians had never even seen used. They had been told it was a legacy system scheduled for decommissioning. To them, it was a museum piece. To Rostova, it was an arsenal. She pulled her worn multi-tool from her belt and, with a flick of her wrist, used a small pry bar to pop open a service panel. Inside was a dense thicket of wires and fiber optic cables. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, her expression one of absolute concentration. She didn't consult a schematic or a manual. The map was in her head. She began to pull cables, rerouting connections, her movements a complex dance of unplugging and replugging. She wasn't just bypassing the corrupted network. She was performing open-heart surgery on the facility's central nervous system. The narrator of this scene would not focus on the technical jargon, but on the sensory details of her actions. The satisfying, solid thunk of a breaker being thrown. The sharp click of a coaxial cable locking into place. The faint scent of warm electronics and ozone released from the open panel. Her breathing was even and slow, a stark contrast to the ragged, panicked breaths of the men around her. She found a bundle of forgotten, thick-jacketed cables labeled Acoustic Array, Sublevel 3. These were the leads for an old, experimental grid of seismic and acoustic sensors embedded in the very foundations of the simulation structure. A prototype system designed to detect movement and sound through solid materials. It had been deemed too unreliable, too prone to interference, and was abandoned in favor of sophisticated optical and thermal imaging. But it was hardwired, completely isolated from a main digital network that the red cell had so brilliantly crippled. It was a ghost limb of the system, and Rostova was about to give it a new and terrible purpose. With a final decisive move, she took a raw audio output cable and physically patched it into an amplifier connected to the room's primary speaker system. A low hiss filled the observation deck, the sound of an open, uncalibrated channel. The room fell silent. Thorne stopped shouting. Everyone stared at the unassuming gunnery sergeant, who now stood before the ancient patch bay, her head cocked slightly as if listening to a whisper no one else could hear. The hiss crackled, then sharpened. A distorted voice bled through the static. Then another. Rostova made a final minute adjustment to a gain dial, and suddenly, the air was filled with crystal-clear audio. Target package is in the vault. They're blind. Repeat, the Overwatch is blind. Move Team 2 to the south entrance. We'll execute on my mark. Set the charges. It was the voice of the simulation's hostile force commander. Rostova had bypassed the dead eyes of the billion-dollar drones and given the assault team something far more valuable. The enemy's unfiltered, private conversation. She had turned their greatest strength, their technological over-reliance, into their greatest vulnerability. In the deafening silence of the control room, the only sound was the enemy planning their own demise, broadcast for all to hear. General Thorne's jaw hung open. His face was a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. That's not possible, he whispered. A slow, deliberate tread echoed on the polished floor, cutting through the stunned silence that had enveloped the observation deck. Every head turned. Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps Leland Jackson emerged from the shadows, his expression as hard and unyielding as the granite from which he'd earned his nickname, Stonewall. He walked with the unhurried gait of a man who had faced down far worse things than a failed simulation. His eyes, however, were not on the flustered and humiliated General Thorne. They were fixed with an intensity that bordered on reverence upon gunnery Sergeant Rostova. He walked past the gaggle of congressmen and colonels as if they were statues in a museum, his presence parting the crowd without a single word. He came to a halt not beside Thorne, but directly beside Rostova, standing at a respectful parade rest as she made one last adjustment to the audio feed, sharpening the clarity of the capture voices. He didn't need to check a file on a datapad or ask a subordinate for a report. The proof was right in front of him, in the methodical competence of her hands and the ghost of a technology he thought had been buried with the past. He let the captured enemy chatter play for another 10 seconds, allowing the full weight of what she had accomplished to settle upon every person in the room. He let them understand that the entire multi-billion-dollar exercise, the careers of the men in that room, and the lives of the Marines in the simulation had just been saved by the quiet woman the general had so casually dismissed. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a gravelly authority that commanded absolute attention, silencing even the crackle from the speakers. Gunnery Sergeant Rostova. He began, his tone formal and resonant. I haven't seen someone manually hot patch a Cerberus acoustic grid since Operation Just Cause in Panama. The system was decommissioned in '95. There is only one unit in the entire Department of Defense that ever received advanced training on its architecture. He turned his gaze away from Rostova and swept it across the sea of astonished faces, his eyes locking for a moment on General Thorne, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. Sergeant Major Jackson's voice filled the cavernous room, each word landing with the percussive force of an artillery shell. Gentlemen, for those of you who measure a warrior's worth by the shine on their boots or the sharpness of their uniform's press, I suggest you pay close attention. He gestured with a subtle nod toward Rostova, who remained focused on her console, her work now done. You are not looking at a technician. You're looking at Gunnery Sergeant Eva Rostova, call sign Echo for the last 15 years. She has served as the lead signals intelligence exploitation chief for Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. MARSOC, the name of the elite unit hung in the air, charged with meaning. The nervous whispers in the room died instantly, replaced by a profound, almost sacred hush. Jackson wasn't finished. He began to list her accomplishments, not as a dry recitation from a file, but as a litany of honor, a testament to a life lived at the sharpest edge of conflict. She has 18 combat deployments to her name, deployments to places whose names are not spoken in unclassified briefings. She is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, awarded for actions in the Kinner Valley where she, while wounded, held off a sustained enemy assault on her outpost comm shack for 72 hours, single-handedly maintaining vital communication links that coordinated the air support that saved the lives of her entire company. He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. She holds the Silver Star for crawling a kilometer under direct enemy fire to retrieve sensitive signals equipment from a downed helicopter. She holds a Bronze Star with a Combat V device for valor, for identifying and locating a high-value target by analyzing ambient sound patterns during a firefight. He took a step closer to Rostova, his voice softening with a deep paternal respect. The system today did not fail. It was attacked, and Gunnery Sergeant Rostova did not just fix it. She did what true masters of their craft do. She adapted. She improvised. She overcame. She took the wreckage of your state-of-the-art network and weaponized a ghost. She didn't need your drones, General, he said, his eyes now boring into Thorne. She can hear a man's heartbeat through 6 inches of reinforced concrete and tell you what he had for breakfast. Having delivered his verdict, Sergeant Major Jackson turned to face Rostova fully. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. In a gesture that sent a shockwave through the room's rigid hierarchy, the highest-ranking enlisted man in the entire Marine Corps snapped to the sharpest, most precise position of attention. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, his movements crisp and flawless. It was a salute of profound, unadulterated respect, a public acknowledgement from one legendary warrior to another. Gunnery Sergeant, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your professionalism is a credit to the Corps. It is an honor to stand in your presence. Rostova finally turned from the console. She met his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, not pride, but a quiet, weary understanding. She returned the salute with a simple, clean motion. Thank you, Sergeant Major. The story of what happened in the Crucible spread with the speed and intensity of a wildfire in a dry canyon. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports, which would be sanitized and classified. It traveled the way all true military legends do, through whispers in chow halls, late-night calls between old comrades, and encrypted emails flashing between command posts across the globe. It was dubbed the Echo and the General, or, more simply, the Rostova Maneuver. Within days, every Marine from Paris Island to Okinawa knew the tale of the quiet gunnery sergeant who had single-handedly humbled a pompous general and saved the Corps' most expensive training exercise with a piece of forgotten analog hardware. The details became mythologized in the retelling. Some versions claimed she had rewired the building using nothing but a paperclip and a piece of chewing gum. Others swore that the audio she captured was so clear you could hear the enemy's heartbeats quicken in fear as the assault team breached the door. The core of the story, however, remained unchanged. Quiet competence had faced down loud arrogance, and competence had won a resounding, undeniable victory. The physical space of the simulation center was changed forever. The dusty, forgotten patch bay was encased in protective plexiglass, a small brass plaque affixed next to it. It read, "The Rostova Grid." Let this serve as a reminder that the most powerful weapon is not the newest, but the one wielded by the most capable hands. The audio file of her capturing the enemy's communications became a mandatory part of the curriculum at the Marine Corps Communication Electronics School. Instructors would play the recording in a darkened classroom, letting the students hear the moment a ghost in the machine turned the tide, using it as a lesson in ingenuity and the importance of understanding the fundamentals of one's craft. For General Thorne, the humiliation was a crucible of its own. He was not formally reprimanded. His connections saw to that. But the informal punishment was far worse. He became a cautionary tale, a walking punchline. The respectful greetings from his peers became tinged with an almost imperceptible irony. He saw the story in the eyes of the junior officers who now avoided his gaze. The foundation of his authority, built on bluster and rank, had been shattered. A week after the incident, a humbled Brigadier General Thorne appeared at the entrance of the MARSOC Signals Intelligence Training Facility. He was alone, without his usual entourage of aides. He stood stiffly, his immaculate uniform seeming more like a costume than a symbol of authority. He requested, formally and through the proper channels, a moment of Gunnery Sergeant Rostova's time. She met him not in an office, but in a workshop, a place that smelled of solder and ozone, filled with the dissected carcasses of radios and encryption devices. She was in the middle of teaching a young lance corporal how to properly splice a fiber optic cable. She simply nodded at the general and continued her instruction, her voice low and patient. "Easy pressure," she told the young Marine. "Let the tool do the work. You force it, you'll fracture the core." Thorne waited, shifting his weight uncomfortably, a king waiting for an audience with a blacksmith. When she was finished, she wiped her hands on a rag and turned to face him, her expression as neutral as ever. The general cleared his throat, unable to meet her direct gaze. "Gunnery Sergeant," he began, his voice strained. "I have reviewed the after-action report. Your unconventional solution was remarkable." It was the closest he could come to an apology. His pride would not allow the word itself to pass his lips. "I am here to formally request that you prepare a brief for my command staff on asymmetric threats in the cyber domain and legacy system exploitation." It was a profound concession. He was not ordering her. He was asking for her expertise. He was admitting, in his own stilted way, that she knew a universe about warfare that he had never even considered. Rostova considered his request for a moment, her gray eyes seeming to look right through him. She gave a single, short nod. "Understood, General. I'll have a syllabus on your desk by Friday." There was no triumph in her voice, no hint of "I told you," so there was only the calm, quiet professionalism that defined her very existence. She then turned back to the lance corporal, who had been watching the exchange with wide-eyed awe. "All right, Corporal," she said, her tones softening slightly. "Let's work on your terminal crimping. The foundation of all secure communications is a solid, reliable connection." The lesson was for the corporal, but its meaning was not lost on the general. He stood there for another moment, an irrelevant figure in a world of tangible skill and earned respect, before turning and walking away, his polished boots echoing his solitary retreat. The legend of Eva Rostova wasn't built in that moment of public vindication, but in the quiet moments that followed, in the patient transfer of knowledge, in the humble dedication to her craft and her fellow Marines. 1 year later, the auditorium at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms was filled to capacity with a graduating class of the Advanced Cyber Warfare Operations course. These were the new generation of digital warriors, Marines trained to fight in a battlefield of algorithms and encrypted data streams. The guest speaker was not a celebrated combat hero or a 4-star command officer. It was Brigadier General Marcus Thorne. He walked to the podium, not with the swagger he had once possessed, but with a quiet dignity, a man reshaped by a profound and public lesson. He looked out at the sea of young, eager faces and cleared his throat. He did not speak of his own accomplishments or the grand strategies of the Pentagon. He told them a story. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I stood in the most technologically advanced battle simulation center on Earth. I was surrounded by the best and brightest. I was confident. I was arrogant. And I was a fool." He recounted the events of that day in the Crucible, leaving out no embarrassing detail. He told them about the system failure, the ensuing panic, and his own impotent rage. He described his dismissive insult and the sharp elbow he had delivered to a gunnery sergeant he had judged by her appearance. Then, he told them about Rostova. He spoke of her silence, her calm, her impossible feat of resurrecting a dead system. I stood there, he confessed, wearing the rank of a general, and I knew nothing. I was in the presence of a true warrior, and I was too blind to see it. She did not carry a rifle that day. Her weapon was her mind. Her ammunition was her experience. And her armor was a quiet professionalism that I have spent every day of the last year trying to understand. He looked directly at the graduates. Your primary weapon will be a keyboard, but your true strength will not be measured in bandwidth or processing speed. It will be measured by your character, by your humility, by your willingness to listen to the quietest person in the room, because they are often the one who holds the answer. The Marine Corps doesn't need more generals like I was. It needs more warriors like Gunnery Sergeant Rostova. Look for the Rostova in your unit. Better yet, be the Rostova in your unit. The legacy of that day became woven into the very fabric of the modern Marine Corps. The story of Gunnery Sergeant Rostova became a foundational parable, a piece of institutional folklore passed down from fire team leaders to new recruits, a constant reminder that the symbols of power are worthless without the substance of competence to back them up. The Rostova grid became more than just a name on a plaque. It became a concept. To pull a Rostova became slang for finding an ingenious, low-tech solution to a complex, high-tech problem. It was a philosophy that championed substance over style, action over words, and humility over hubris. General Thorne, for his part, became an unlikely but powerful advocate for this new mindset. His speech at the graduation ceremony was recorded and became a viral sensation within the military's internal networks. He used his own public failure as his greatest teaching tool, transforming his moment of deepest shame into a powerful lesson for a new generation of leaders. He championed programs that identified and promoted individuals based on demonstrated skill and peer reviews, rather than just traditional metrics of career advancement. He had learned, in the most public way possible, that true leadership is not about demanding respect, but about creating an environment where competence is respected no matter the rank or appearance of the person who possesses it. And what of Gunnery Sergeant Rostova? She remained, as always, in the shadows. She politely declined every interview request and every offer of a medal for her actions in the crucible, stating simply that she had just been doing her job. She continued to serve, to teach, and to innovate, far from the spotlight and the praise. Her legacy was not in the story they told about her, but in the countless Marines she mentored, in the improved systems she quietly designed, and in the lives that were saved by the lessons she embodied. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a flurry of headlines and commendations. It's what continues forward in the actions and character of those you inspire. Rostova's silence had become a roar, an enduring lesson that echoed in the quiet professionalism of thousands of Marines, a testament to the simple, profound truth that what you are is infinitely more important than what you appear to be. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.